Everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Shelby. I'm the marketing coordinator at Doghouse IT Solutions. Before introducing our speakers, I have a couple quick housekeeping notes to go over. First, at the end of the presentation, we will have some time available for questions. In the upper left-hand corner of your screen, you will see Q&A tab. Please click there and then type your question and submit it. It looks like we have a lot of people on the call today, but we will do our best to answer all your questions toward the end. Second, we'll be doing a giveaway contest after the Q&A with several prizes to include a $100 gift card for the top winner. We will give instructions on how to participate and then announce who the prize winners are while we're on the call today. All right, without further ado, I'd like to first introduce Chad Rowe. He's the Business Development Manager here at Doghouse IT Solutions. He's been with the firm since 2013. He is a member of the Nashville Technology Council and completed his CISM certification in Advanced Security Management in 2014. Co-hosting our meeting today is Tim Cattell. Tim joined Higgins Insurance in 2005, and he works in commercial, life, health, and personal lines. Tim received his CIC designation in 2008. With that, thank you for your attention, and I'll turn it over to Chad and Tim.
My goodness, Shelby, what an introduction, lady. That was outstanding. And your hair today, I just have to tell you, looks exceptionally blonde and fantastic.
Why, thank you.
So,
good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us here today. And my man, Tim, with me in the house.
We're here.
How we feeling?
Great. Ready to go.
Good. What do you think about our topics today?
Well, I think it's going to be eye-opening. When we go to these meetings in insurance school, sometimes these things scare you to death, and we're not trying to scare you to death. We're just trying to hopefully educate.
That's the plan. Yeah, this is stuff we're excited about. We live it every day, so happy to share. Hope everybody comes away with something useful to take away from it. So let's get right to it. We really have quite a bit we want to cover with everyone today that's on the call. But I would like to start, if you would just humor me for a minute here, Tim, with a little bit of statistics. And I know those get thrown around quite a bit in our industry, but last year, there were over 2 billion records that were stolen worldwide last year alone. So cybercrime is really kind of out of control right now. So 2 billion records, me, myself, personally, I had 3 incidences where my personal information was stolen. Did that happen to you at all last year?
If it did, I wasn't aware of it, and that's part of the problem.
Yeah, that's exactly part of the problem. So it's big, it's small, it's all over the place. We're hoping to really kind of narrow some light down on this. The UN did a study also last year, and they figured that 80% of this activity is actually being done by highly organized, highly sophisticated criminal gangs. Russians come to mind, don't they?
Yeah, they've been in the news a little.
Yeah. I would say that is absolutely true. And the estimated industry size for this whole thing, I mean, if you can imagine this, $445 billion industry in stealing data, hacking networks, that type of stuff. Can you believe that?
It's quite amazing.
Yeah, and really, in my mind, what's particularly alarming about all of this is that oftentimes, you can think back about the big breaches that we've seen. Oftentimes, it's really months after the breach occurs that we, the consumer, we, the people, even hear that anything's happened.
And part of the problem is the size and scope that we're talking about sometimes makes it not real. It makes it's happening somewhere else. It's happening only to the mega businesses and the big accounts, and that's we'll learn it's just not true.
100%. And that number, I mean, let's put that in perspective. $445 billion is more than the GDP of 160 nations. I mean, we're talking about, this isn't chump change, it's the real deal.
It is.
It is the real deal. So the big question is, why? Why is this happening? Why is it taking so long for us to hear about these breaches when they're occurring? Like I say, months and months after they've actually happened. And a lot of it is these large companies that just don't want to deal with the fallout of their own lackluster security practices.
Yes, and again, what we're going to hopefully today do is a little bit is this happens to the big companies, but honestly, more often than not, the percentage is it's happening to the small businessman.
That's right. Yeah, we're definitely going to get into that. But the reputation loss, all the fines and regulations that are involved with data breaches these days, we're definitely seeing some changes. In fact, Gartner is predicting that in 2018, the spend worldwide on security alone is going to be about $93 billion. And that's up from $80 billion last year.
It's just everything about this crime is growing almost exponentially. It's just bigger and bigger.
And this probably isn't news to anybody that's on the call. I mean, you hear things like this, you see things like this in the news, and this is kind of what I call the blunt force trauma of the technology world, because everybody's hearing these numbers and they're getting beat over the head. And really, it's all just noise, right?
Yes.
Isn't it?
Yes. We tend not to process it that it's going to affect me. We tend to process it's happening somewhere else.
And the news is piling on, and there's people selling data breach, the latest, greatest backups, malicious, protection from all this stuff. So there's a whole industry evolving around kind of the panic that's happening around breaches and attacks. And while this is probably alarming for most of the people on the call, and you're not foreign to the fact that this is going on, with all the stresses of running an organization, I mean, we're worried about P&Ls, we're worried about sales, we're worried about employees calling in, getting sick. Most business leaders I talk to, and correct me if I'm wrong, Tim, but they're not really looking to add anything to their plate of a to-do list, are they?
No, they're not. And fundamentally, they really, truly don't understand where the risk comes from. They tend to think they have things in place, or they're using third-party software. It's somebody else's problem and not theirs, and it doesn't come home to roost till they realize it is their problem.
Bingo. So real quick, why should people discuss investing, doing, or changing anything that they're doing today? Why should we change? Why should we care more? What are the things that matter? I would contend, first off, thinking about your security, thinking about where your business is at, it's the right thing to do. All of us work together in our communities. We're all processing payments. We're all storing PII of each other in the community. So first of all, it's the right thing to do to be good stewards of that information.
Absolutely.
The second thing, Tim, I know this one's near and dear to you, but
the laws have changed. It started basically, as a lot of the things sometimes do in California, when there was pressure about the cyber attacks, about theft over the internet. And so California came up with a set of cybersecurity laws and regulations, making businesses responsible for the information that they've gathered. And from that, then other states and on and on. And now nearly every state has a cybersecurity law of some type. So what that means is if you do not comply with that law, meaning if there is a breach and you don't comply, there can be fines that can add up. And we've got a slide a little later that shows that specifically.
It's the nanny state getting mean. The nanny state recognizing it as a threat, and the laws are changing quickly, Absolutely. Very quickly. Another reason that you should think about this is because SMBs are the easy targets. They are the low-hanging fruit for people that want to commit fraud, get PII, get credit card numbers. They're the easy targets. So, we need to recognize that fact and pay attention to it. And these last two points that I want to make is that this is what we at Doghouse here see as changing in terms of the security landscape. And the first item is that the dark web, which we're going to talk about a little bit later as well, but essentially that's the place where criminals congregate. That's where they go on the internet to deal in illegal goods, and a lot of illegal activities happen. Today, in comparison to even just 5 years ago, it is ridiculously easy to access and ridiculously easy to use. And we're going to talk some more about that. To the extent even where these days you don't even have to be a tier 1, super smart, highly skilled hacker to try to attack a company or try to make some money in a criminal sense. The hackers are actually selling do-it-yourself kits, complete with customer support.
That's amazing.
You know what I'm saying? So it's changed. And over here to the right, you'll see a couple examples. There are 3 large examples of breaches that have happened just since the first of the year. I'm sure everybody's heard about the Equifax breach, but what didn't get hardly any news was Department of Homeland Security had a breach, and FedEx also had a massive breach through one of their vendors. So it's real, man.
It's absolutely
it's real stuff. Real stuff. So I think it's really kind of best summed up in the SMB world anyway by one of the titans of the technology industry. You know who this guy is?
I've seen his picture before. Don't know him personally.
Former CEO of Intel, Andrew Grove, just an absolute monster in the field. Probably if you had to point to a single human being that had the most influence on how we view technology today, this would be the cat. This is the dude that did it. And if anybody's looking for a good read that's just about leadership in general, Mr. Grove wrote a book that's called Only the Paranoid Survive. And this here is a quote that comes from that book, and it reads, "Success breeds complacency, complacency breeds failure, and only the paranoid survive." Pretty deep, right?
Well, it is, and it sounds kind of a negative statement, but it's just being proactive. It's what, to me, paranoid could be saying proactive, being a good steward of your business and the way business is done today. That means you're taking in information from other people, and you need to be a good steward of that information as well.
Yeah, exactly. So to take it a little bit more literal, success breeds complacency in the context of our discussion today. Success means you haven't had a breach or an incident that you know of.
That you know of. And that's critical. That you know of.
Yeah. Yeah, so you've had success in the sense that nothing's happened to you.
Right.
Your head is safely buried in the sand. This is really nothing that's concerning you at this point in time. And that complacency breeds failure because we know without a question statistically that eventually keeping your head buried in the sand will lead to an incident of some kind.
It could, yes.
Yeah, absolutely. So what are we going to talk about today, Tim? We're going to go over a couple, actually 2 or 3 case studies here of some things that have actually happened right here in our community. So instead of talking about some of that high-level noise, let's bring it home. Let's talk about some people that live right here.
You know, the SMBs we're referring to is the small business people that are working every day, maybe only have 10 employees or 20 employees, however many that is. But through the internet, your exposure is worldwide.
Bingo. Yeah, we're all connected. And then we're going to talk about some breach laws, specifically why even have a cyber or a data security policy. Tim's going to talk a little bit about insurance coverages, just so everybody can understand how that world works. And then I'm going to discuss 12 things that you can check on or put in place right now inside your network that can help reduce some risk. And then lastly, this is kind of exciting. As Joni mentioned, we have a totally killer, awesome giveaway contest at the very end of this thing. So for everybody that hangs on the call with us at the very end, we're giving away a few prizes, but the top prize is $100.
Go out and spend it.
That's pretty good. That's a dinner with the wife. That's
yeah,
a couple cocktails, something.
Yep,
for sure. And ultimately, we really want to just help you guys avoid being a sitting duck. We're passionate about this space, this industry. Certainly, we feed our families by helping companies with this. But I think, you know, when Tim and I were sitting down and putting this thing together, we genuinely just want to see people be smarter about this. Whether you do business with Higgins, whether you do any business with Doghouse.
You just need to understand and be educated. I don't know, maybe everybody on this call has gone on the website and looked what the data breach laws are and what the fines can be. Maybe you're aware of it, but I would bet probably not. And it's just not the fines we're talking about. Hopefully you can avoid the fines. That's one of the goals, is to avoid being fined, but then the cost that can be involved after a breach on down the line, first, third party, I mean, it can just start snowballing.
No sitting ducks after this call.
Exactly.
That's our motto. So we mentioned a few case studies. Here's the first one I want to go through. All names have been changed to protect the innocent, but this is Bob's Manufacturing, and this, what we're about to talk through, happened last year to a company out of Springfield that eventually did end up becoming a Doghouse client. What they went through is, you know, Bob's the owner here, and through a phishing scheme, a targeted phishing attack, some criminals were able to get a hold of his email and password. And what often happens once they gain some access to him is they'll lurk. They'll sit around for a while. They'll gather some information. They'll gather some intel. They will be very, very patient because there's no rush, even to the tune of, you know, even if there's nothing that they maybe want off your network or whatever they've gained access to, who do you interact with? So these guys aren't idiots about this. They're very, very smart. And in this case, the hacker was able to get access to the payment processing system where they put in a virus that was transmitting every card transaction back to them. So every credit card that Bob's business was processing was going back to these crooks, probably sitting in Russia.
Yeah.
We're going to blame Russia a lot today.
Why not?
Absolutely. So for over a year, unbeknownst to Bob, these fraudulent charges were occurring to his customer where they were kind of getting hit. And what kind of culminated in it becoming actionable was a credit card company, one of the major ones, starting to put the numbers together and realize that it's Bob.
Wow.
All this is coming from Bob. What's going on, Bob?
What about Bob?
What about Bob? What are you doing? So they contacted Bob, and that's really kind of where the rest of the story begins and ends. So he didn't have any insurance. He was kind of didn't really have much of a plan together aside from some fairly smart employees that could do some Google warrioring to fix IT issues, things like that. But he really didn't know what to do. He didn't have any guidance. Called in some computer repair guys, you know, and eventually through the process figured out that he really needed to get a forensic specialist involved to figure out what was happening, what was stolen. So he was about $30,000 in when Doghouse met him, and you know that was really just kind of the tip of the iceberg.
It can grow and grow.
It can happen to anybody, right? Here's another one. This is an accounting firm out of Nashville that we actually didn't do any business with them, but they did do the books for one of our clients, and this is kind of how Doghouse got involved. So Barbara, she was in billing and receivables, and she was out sick for a few days during a pretty busy time for the firm. And when she got back to the office, she realized that she had a lot of things to catch up on, and made the decision to take the files that she needed off the company network, put them on her personal laptop so she could get the job done in the evening. So trying to do the right thing, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, she's trying to get caught up, be where she needs to be. Unfortunately, on her way home, she stopped at a pharmacy to get some meds, and somebody broke in and stole her laptop.
And that is an immediate breach. You wouldn't think so because you're thinking, well, no one came through the internet and stole this information. How is this a cyber crime? It is a cyber crime because information on her laptop that contained, and we'll define that term a little bit, the PII, that is the textbook definition of a breach, according to the state of Tennessee and Kentucky.
Yeah. So again, kind of same situation. They did have an IT firm they were using, but they didn't have the tools in place on the network to prevent her from downloading that information onto her personal device. These guys spent a ton of money. Like I say, Doghouse was kind of involved from the outside looking in, and this firm actually did end up going out of business. But I know they were about 75 grand in before. Just the reputation damage alone.
Exactly.
I mean, these are people that you trust with your money.
Exactly.
Right? So. And then the last one that I'd like to talk through, this one is actually right here at home in Clarksville, and this was a very, very troubling story. There was a gentleman named Harvey that was kind of working late. This was a not-for-profit, and he was getting some work done and decided to check his personal email. So he got in, dialed up his Gmail, checking a few things out, and he saw he had an invoice from an accounting firm. Probably the same firm we were just talking about, if I had to guess.
Information stolen from there.
That's right. He didn't know he didn't think he owed anybody any money, and he figured that they probably just sent it to the wrong person. So trying to be a decent fella, he opened it up, and it was a Word document that just looked all jumbled and kind of crazy looking. And he thought maybe there were some calculations in the document, and he decided to hit enable content so those calculations could kind of happen, and he got a blank page. So he thought, man, just some crazy spam. Let me just shut this computer down. I'm going home for the night. And as some of you may know, that's kind of a classic tell of some ransomware being loaded onto the network. So when he enabled that file, it came in, the software that was running behind the scenes came in and ran overnight, went through his computer and every other device on the network and encrypted it. So the next morning when everybody came in, they were greeted with a not so wonderful message demanding $15,000 within 72 hours to unlock the file.
We were talking about this earlier, and for me, I've got to put it in a way that makes sense. What they're basically done is taken all the information and put it in their safe in their house and locked it up, and I'm not going to give you the combination until you pay $15,000. It's really no more complicated than that.
It's just that simple. It is just that simple. So these are in this particular case, we were able to help them restore some data, but unfortunately, a lot of it they didn't have good backups in place, so a lot of it was gone for them. But they're in a much better space now. So real world examples. We could talk about this for a while if we wanted to. We see this stuff all the time.
And this next slide is kind of what I was referring when we were talking about small business, and we hear about the big breaches. I remember for one reason Target is always stuck in my mind because I think that was the first one I remember that was a retailer that affected the consumers directly through the credit cards. But as this slide talks about, 85% of all the data breaches that occur in small businesses. So we hear about the big ones, and they're on the news. We don't hear about the small manufacturer or the CPA firm. That's not on the CBS News. That's happening all the time, but it's happening quietly. First of all, they don't want people to know.
Yeah, who's raising their hand for that?
Exactly.
Nobody's raising their hand for that.
And when I read this slide, and I saw that 85% are small business, okay, I understand that. The next part does bother me. 60% of those businesses that are victimized shut down within 6 months. It's because these kind of claims take on a life of their own. If you have your house insured and it hopefully never happens, it gets blown down, it's a finite. You get your money to rebuild the house and you move on. These kinds of claims just seem to keep growing and keep growing.
It's a great point.
And you've got to have some protection against that, I feel. At least be aware that you can, and then you make that decision.
That's right. That's absolutely right. And this is regardless of your complacency level. It doesn't matter if you got your head in the sand or not. I mean, this is the reality of the world we're living in today, folks, for sure. And I thought this was kind of interesting on this chart. So you can see by far the source of exposure, hackers are at 30%. And what's the next biggest category? Staff, mistakes, people. Unintentional.
Right.
So this isn't necessarily anybody trying to harm you.
And this might be a good time to point this out. We're talking about computers and software and networks. A data breach can be a paper loss as well. I use this example a lot. The guy that runs a small contracting company, electrician, doesn't matter, got 6 or 7 employees. And his pickup truck is his rolling office. That's his world. And he's not only got his job information and probably information on his customers in there, he probably has information on his employees. So it's readily available. I mean, as I said, it's his rolling office. And if that truck gets broken into and all that stuff gets maybe even stolen and thrown away, it doesn't matter. That's still a breach. It doesn't have to be an absolute computer-oriented crime.
Absolutely.
It can be a paper loss as well. That's still a breach.
And now coming to the forefront because of cyber breach rulings and all these laws that are coming into place, it's bringing the paper records right along with it,
Absolutely.
Right? Is that fair to say?
It is. I mean, and people forget about that you've got filing cabinets, et cetera, et cetera. And if they get broken into, and again, they may just be taken out and thrown into trash or destroyed, it's still a breach. It's still the definition of a breach.
Got it.
Okay.
Rock and roll, Timmy. Rock
Here
and
we
roll.
go.
Rock and roll. So give us some terminology here. So we're getting ready to get into a little bit more of the weeds as far as the laws go and what your policies look like and kind of explain that world. But give us some terms that we can
understand. What they've come up with is the definition of a breach is we've all had our name and our phone number and our address in the phone book for decades. We didn't ever worry about that. That was public information. What's changed now is that when you have that information available just about to anybody, your name and address.
So that's this first one here, right? Where we're talking about
personal identifiable information. You have to have a name and address coupled with any one of these other items, your social security number, your driver's license number, your credit card, your bank. If you couple your name and information, address, for example, with one of these items, that's now called a personally identifiable information. And if that information is what is gotten breached or gotten lost or gotten stolen or misplaced, then that's where the cyber or the data breach comes into play. Everyone's aware of the fact that health information through HIPAA laws, I mean, they protect that with iron locks.
So let me ask you this, Tim.
Yeah.
So if I've got QuickBooks set up and I've got my customer list that's in there and my QuickBooks was breached, would that be considered PII?
Depending on exactly what information you're talking about. If you just have maybe their name and their address, maybe not. But if you've got any other of that information coupled with that, then that's called personally identified information, and that is the definition of a breach.
Got it.
And again, medical information, as I mentioned, it's very, very sensitive. And if that gets breached, I mean, there's not only state laws, now you're getting into the feds.
The big boys.
With the big boys, right.
Got it.
And then we're talking about data breach or privacy breach. That is the unauthorized theft of that personal information. And then, of course, the network and privacy liability. That's like you were talking about earlier with the CPA firm that not necessarily you were working directly with, but you were working sideways with. But that network got compromised, and by contract, since you were working with them and you're getting on their network and working with them, and a breach comes through you, then by contract, you're required to take care of that breach. You're liable for that breach with that company because it came from you.
So these last two, in terms of network security, we're kind of talking about your responsibility for keeping your network up to date.
Exactly.
And in common best practices.
Especially with the credit card, credit card machines.
PCI type stuff.
PCIs, you're supposed to change passwords. You're supposed to maintain different types of security. And if you don't, and it gets compromised, again, that's where you can get fined, not just from the state of Tennessee or the government. You can get fined from that company because it's in the contract. If you breach or don't follow those rules of using that software, then you can be in trouble and be fined for it.
Got it. And that privacy liability one to me is kind of near and dear to home. And I know that's coming up on the next couple slides here, but where you're talking about third-party people having access to your information, I've got a few good points I want to make about that one. All right, Lawman, break it down. Johnny Law, in the house.
Like I said, this got started out west. I'll just hit the highlights. Basically, the state of Tennessee and Kentucky mirrors it as well. You've got 45 days from when you understand a breach is made to start notifying the people that are on that breach. And that, as I've said many times already, sometimes you don't know you've had a breach till someone tells you. You don't realize someone's been running a scam on you and all of a sudden has this information. But once you're made aware, you've got 45 days from that discovery to start notifying the people that have been exposed. And then you can see down here in the penalties, it can get expensive.
Hold on, I want to back you up right there, Tim, because so first of all, we're talking about people that own, license, or maintain any type of PII, which we described on the last slide.
Right.
So secondly here, if I'm reading this right, a notification trigger happens from the time they find out there's a breach?
Yes.
Is that how that works?
Yes. From when when you find out you've had a breach, if you don't know it, then you don't know it.
But as soon as you realize that something's happened, that's called the notification trigger.
Exactly.
Okay. And it looks to me here like it doesn't really matter if the data breached is encrypted or not.
No, it doesn't. And that was a new law, actually, that they added in April of 16, I think, or that they thought if it was encrypted, there was some protection there, but they've decided now that no, it's still your responsibility to protect that information.
So in my mind, I mean, those two things, combined with that last piece of the prior slide where we were talking about third-party vendors coming in.
Right.
I work with a lot of companies that are doing business in the cloud.
Yes.
And the way these cloud vendors are selling their services these days is they're telling folks, hey, we got you. You're secure. You don't have to worry about any of this stuff. We got you 100% taken care of.
Yeah.
You're not gonna have to buy into this equipment. You're all safe. And I'm continually kind of fighting that battle of, in the real world, that's just certainly not true. And, so here, if there was a third-party vendor that had the data and there was a breach, you've still got some liability for that, don't you?
If they got the data from you, yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Because it's your data.
One example you gave earlier about the gentleman with his own personal email and Gmail account, he was on his company's network accessing his own personal emails, if I remember
That's right. Yeah. Yep.
So, I mean, you could say to the company, well, it wasn't our email, well, it doesn't matter. It was on your network. That's where the network security comes in.
Right.
And it was accessed through that into the network. So,
so human beings are playing a big role in a lot of this.
Yes.
A lot of it.
And it's not intentional.
No.
From the employee side, I'm not talking about they're doing anything on purpose. It's just happening in spite of what they're doing.
Understood. I think you were going to talk about the penalty.
Well, basically, you can see it can grow very quickly. It can get very expensive. What we're talking about here today is how to prevent that.
Right.
How you can protect yourself. If you're at all concerned about that, you can protect yourself against those kinds of fines. That's what we're here to talk about.
Great. Good. And again, if anybody's got any questions on any of this stuff, feel free. There's a little Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Just go ahead and type it, and we're going to have some time at the end for Joni to ask some questions. So here we go. So here it is. Let's let the rubber meet the road, shall we?
That's all about.
Yeah.
Let's just talk about. It says why have a cyber policy? Well, why have insurance? What insurance is, and we just pay a premium. I do. You do on home autos. You pay a premium and you think, well, this is just the cost of doing business. In reality, what we're doing every time we do that, every payment we make, we're transferring the risk of whatever it is we're paying for, whether it's a home policy or an auto policy. We're transferring the risk of a loss from yourself to an insurance company, and obviously they're not going to do it for free. In essence, if you're comfortable and you have a $150,000 home, and if it burns down or blows up or blows away, and you're happy with spending $150,000, don't buy insurance for it. Most folks can't afford that. So that's what an insurance policy, in essence, is all about. Transferring the risk from you to an insurance company for a premium.
And the cyber insurance and data insurance is no different.
It's the same thing.
Yeah.
The difference is, I feel, I kind of understand if a house catches fire, what's happened and what's going on. It's a finite thing we can understand. An auto accident. The scary part about a cyber breach or a data breach is fundamentally not understanding how it happened most of the time and where it's going to go. When you have a cyber policy, the moment you discover a breach, you contact, if you have the insurance, you contact that insurance company and they take it from there. One thing I think everybody can understand, insurance companies don't want to pay claims if they don't have to. So if they can get to the state and notify these people that have been breached before that 45 days is up, that's what they're going to endeavor to do. And they're going to try to take care of that, give you the experts, a coach, to get you through this. And they're going to make sure that the states and the feds are notified that you're working on this, that you're notifying the people, giving them the information of how it's being done, and making sure it complies with that state's laws.
And I see an interesting one here too, Tim, and which probably comes into play a lot if there's any kind of a technical data breach, is foreign law. I mean, a lot of this is foreign actors that are coming in and doing these things.
Yes.
So this stuff gets complicated fast, doesn't it?
And that's why when you have the peace of mind that when it happens, you turn it over to the insurance company, and it's on them to get it done now.
Right.
You know, they want it. You know, you want to stay abreast of it, keep an eye on it, but it's up to them then to make sure that you're meeting those laws and staying compliant.
So you get an expert that does this every day. It's what they do for a living.
That's what they do, and it's amazing, you know, what they can do. It's amazing the technical expertise that they have at their fingertips for the forensics to understand what happened and why it happened, to understand who's been exposed and who hasn't. All these little items we'll go over in the next slide, but these are the things that you can get. And I want to make sure I'm clear. There are two kinds of insurance on this. There's data breach insurance and cyber liability. You can buy the data breach by itself, and it has limited coverages. And basically, the data breach is to protect the insured individual. In other words, the risk, the company that has the breach happen to, it pays those fines, it pays the cost to notify. And it's called coverage part A, and it goes only so far. It makes the cost of the fines, it makes the cost of the notifications, that's covered by the insurance.
So if I'm understanding you right, this claims part A right here is talking about dollars for which you could be liable for.
Exactly.
So this is dollars between you and the public, you and the offended person.
Between actually you and the states and the making sure you're compliant. So in other words, we call it first party. I'm not getting too many insurance terms. First party being the insured. So if you're fined, it's going to cover it. The cost to notify, it's going to cover it. A data breach is not going to take care of what we call the third party or the downline risk that can happen.
Let's talk about the rest of those then.
As I said, where the cost can get, let's talk briefly about one thing that people forget, and it's important. If you have a breach and your system is compromised and you're doing business every day and all of a sudden you're not doing business anymore, you can't get things billed, you can't collect this, you can't do your job. If you get the full data and cyber liability, you can get what you can see on the one line, business interruption. And that's something of real value because they're going to determine how much business you lost the time that you were down, and you have insurance to help defray those costs. And then obviously we've got the data breach expense we talked about, notification, public relations. That's all part of the coverage A part. The data restoration, very limited on a data breach data restoration. It normally doesn't cover very much money for that. Again, a true data cyber liability will expand that coverage and make the dollars bigger so that you can recover whatever data you lost. The extortion is never on usually a part A. Extortion is always going to be on the third part of the data, the cyber liability. And the beauty of this is, they may ask you for $15,000. Okay, you contact the insurance company. They come in.
So if you got ransomware.
Exactly, if you got ransomware. And they come in and they determine, hey, this isn't a real threat for you. They really didn't get the information. We've got it backed up. I think you're in good shape. You've done, as small businessman, you've done a pretty good job. I don't think we need to pay this. Well, unless you have the expertise to make that determination, the insurance company will help you understand what the true risk is from that ransomware, if it's real or if it's not real.
Brilliant. It's a much needed service for sure.
And then, of course, the identity theft, if everyone remembers some of these big, huge breaches, I think it was one of the medical insurance companies. I'm not going to say either one because I don't remember which one it was, but it affected, you asked if something had happened to me, and I forgot about that. We got notified, possibly our information got compromised through one of the health insurance companies. And one of the things they did was give us credit monitoring for a year.
Okay.
Again, that's third-party coverage. That's cyber coverage. That can be very expensive.
Yeah. So part of their cyber coverage paid for that.
And if you don't have insurance and you go down this road and get sued and on, the court could say you've got to, and that's why companies go out of business, by the way, because the court has told them, well, you've got to offer credit monitoring for everybody that's been compromised for up to a year. They don't do that for cheap. That's not free.
Sure.
So it's going to cost money. So the insurance, again, in essence, if you take a data breach and cyber policy, all these risks that we're talking about, all the things that can happen, have now been transferred from you to the insurance company to handle. And it simply boils down if you feel it's worth it or not.
Makes sense.
If it's not to you, if you feel like it's not, then you don't buy it.
Absolutely. Makes sense. Nice job there, Tim.
Well,
I'm enlightened, to be sure. And hopefully we'll have some questions on this too when we get to the end. So that kind of ties up what we wanted to discuss on the insurance front, and I just kind of want to bring it home and talk to everybody about just a few things that you can do right now from a technical standpoint, 12 things that you should be looking at. In the follow-up email to this webinar, you will also get this in a PDF. So don't feel like you got to write any of this stuff down. We're going to send you an actual little checklist where you can make sure that you're covered in these ways. So the first thing of the 12 is a firewall. Most businesses probably know they need to have a firewall in place. You must have a firewall in place.
Yeah.
It is what it says. It's your first line of defense. So if there's anybody on the call that isn't sure or doesn't know if theirs has been updated or hasn't, has bought one that's tied into a router from Walmart or something like that, that's not the route we want to go, guys. So take a look at your firewall and make sure it's set up and being updated the way it needs to be. Updates in general. If you don't have somebody, if you're not working with an IT company that is able to manage your updates for you, updates, I'm talking about Windows, software, all the security patching that a network needs. That's what I mean by updates. And if you don't have somebody that's taking care of that for you on a nightly basis, because it needs to be done nightly these days, it's not like you can go a month without it. Assign that task to somebody in your office. Just put them in charge of, maybe even the firewall too, making sure the firewall is updated, making sure the computers are updated. That'll go a long way to keeping you safe. We continuously run into situations where things just haven't been updated for months and months and months, and it's a huge risk, huge risk. Spam filtering for your email. Our first example of Bob, where he had some phishing attempts coming in. A good spam filter will share intelligence kind of across the world to know when those phishing attacks come and immediately move them to spam or keep them out of your inbox. If you don't have any type of spam filtering in place, go Google it. There's a ton of resources out there, or get in touch with us here. We can help with that too. Endpoint security, so virus protection. This is a space that is changing now where it hasn't really changed for the last 20 years. So there's a lot of new technologies and a lot of smart artificial intelligence type technologies that are making their way just in the last 1.5 to 2 years into the endpoint security space. So the McAfees of the world are kind of starting to go the way of the dinosaur with the way they do things. And there's much better, much more proactive, much more robust solutions available. So you need to make sure you have some type of endpoint security, some type of antivirus. And if you do, you need to be looking at what's next, because there's new technologies coming. That's something that is highly recommended to look at. Backup, everybody on this call, I'm sure, knows they need to be backing up. But what I would strongly encourage,
secure your backup.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, secure your backup, number one. Number two, again, maybe assign somebody in the office the task of verifying that it backed up. I know this is a tragic story for us at the Doghouse, where we have businesses coming in on the very, very regular, where they've had some type of an incident and they thought they were being backed up, and they just weren't. So understand your backup, have somebody responsible for making sure it's happening, and understand what happens if you ever have to access it, if you need it. If you're using like a Carbonite or one of the online ones, they might be cheap on the monthly, but if you ever need to go get that data and something happens, your jaw's probably gonna hit the floor with what they would charge you to actually get that data back. So just understand your backup, have a smart conversation about it. Password policies, everybody knows that's a big one, or you should if you don't. We want to keep those changed every 90 days. And password protect files. I mean, it kind of goes even a little bit deeper when we start talking about employees making mistakes.
Yeah.
Oftentimes we run into situations where an employee made a mistake that they didn't even need access to that to begin with. So take a look at the way your file structure is set up. Password protect what you can, and make sure you get a good password policy in place. Another one that's coming on strong is multi-factor authentication. Basically what that means is when you go to log, maybe some people have seen it on Gmail or through other cloud applications. When you go to log in, it actually sends you a text on your phone with a code that says, hey, this is you. So your cell phone's tied to your online account. A lot of banks have it, that type of thing. If you have the ability to enable this, make sure it's enabled. And we also have the ability to enable this on a network here at the Doghouse. So when somebody goes to log into their computer, it's actually going to authenticate to their phone. So there's a lot of good security features available that way. Encryption, like you were talking about with the backup, and anything that's got PII to it, encryption is certainly the way to go. So if there's an opportunity there for you, something to keep in mind. Awareness training for your employees. This is a big one, I think. This is maybe one of the biggest ones. Are you talking about what a phishing email looks like? Maybe not every day, but once a month, once a quarter. There should be somebody in your business that has some type of an awareness training plan together. For our clients at Doghouse, we manage all of these things for them, but the training is a big part of what we do. We make sure our clients' employees are as smart as they possibly can be about the attacks and the threats that we're seeing out there right now. So think about that. Even if it's just having a conversation around the water cooler on a piece of phishing email, make sure everybody is hearing about it. The dark web, we mentioned that at the beginning, and we're going to kind of wrap up with the dark web in a minute here. But making sure that that you're not out there. There are tools and technologies now that can do that for you. And then we're on here to Timmy's horse. There is no such thing, folks, as 100% security. We are only as good, and believe me, we're pretty good at the Doghouse. We pretty much know what the heck we're doing. But we can only be as good as the known technology. So as the crooks are coming up with new things to get around what is known and what is in place, that's where your breach insurance comes into play. And I would highly recommend getting with Tim if you're not 100% sure that you're good in that department. You need to know what your risks are around that as well. And then the last thing is a security assessment. So this is something that this is probably the one that I get on my high horse the most about. Is you might think you're secure, you might think your IT guy's doing a good job, you've had him for years, you just don't have a lot of issues, you think everything's great. Tim, with something this important, why would you take the chance and not have another set of eyeballs on it.
Absolutely. It goes back to the slide with the gentleman from Intel. Don't get complacent about it.
Don't be complacent. So
A little bit of paranoid.
For our clients, we do a third-party assessment regularly. We run a scan that's done by a third party that lets us know that, hey, yes, we are doing the job that we promised we were going to do. And I would encourage everyone out there that, we offer them here at the Doghouse. We charge for it. It's not free. And the price kind of depends on the size and complexity of your network. There's no big sales pitch that comes along with it. It's literally, here's the assessment. Here's what we identified as being wrong. You go sort it out however you want to. So really, that's a big one for me is getting another set of eyeballs on your network to make sure it's going well. How are we doing, Tim?
We're doing good.
We're doing great.
I hope
we're
there's some questions out there. If they're not, I think my information was on the slide at the beginning.
Well, we'll get that. The last slide I think has our contact info there. But before we get to that, let's get to our giveaway contest. This ought to be fun. You think? Joni, are you ready in there?
I am ready.
Beautiful, beautiful. So as I mentioned, we are, there was a graphic supposed to come up there. Sorry, technical difficulties. So we are going to be giving away to every single person that's on the call right now a complimentary dark web scan. That is a software tool that Doghouse has. And so for every single person that's on the call right now, we're going to show you in a minute here how you can sign up to get a complimentary scan. And we'll just let you know what the report said, let you know what your exposure is out there on the dark web in terms of your domain. Whatever your email is, your domain, that's the way it does the search. However, to the first person that registers for this, and I'm going to give you a link here in a minute where you can go and register for it, they're going to get a $100 gift card.
Yes.
Is that awesome?
That's great.
It's pretty good.
Get your fingers ready.
And the second and the third to register are each going to get $25. Right. It's lunch.
At least.
It's not the 100, but it's 25. So everybody just kind of get your, so that the way this is going to work is on the next slide, I'm going to list a website URL. When you go to that URL, you're going to see a pane on the right-hand side of the page where you can enter your name and your email address. Just hit enter, and Joni's going to let us know who the first one she sees come through the pipe is, and that's going to be first, second, and third prize winners. Like I say, everybody's going to get a complimentary scan, so everybody can go register, and you're going to get that information at the least, but we also have a chance to win some prizes. So there's my graphic I was looking for.
There it is.
Bam. Okay. So the dark web is, as we discussed, where kind of all the badness is happening. Although you don't want to be on it. That's the point. So on to the next slide. And are we ready? You want to give us a countdown, Tim?
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
And
there we go.
There it is, folks. Fingers are furiously typing right now.
I hope so.
They're going crazy.
And again, if you've got questions, please either use this format to ask those questions, or get a hold of me later. I'd be happy to review it with you. I will say this: of everything I've talked about in insurance, I have no idea what your expectations, your thoughts are of how expensive this kind of insurance is. And I just don't want to get in, because it all boils down to how many numbers we're dealing with, how many accounts we're dealing with, how many people you're keeping information on. But I will just say, generally, it's not nearly as expensive as you might be thinking it is. And it's just, again, transferring that risk from your shoulders to the insurance company. And if it's worth it to you, it is. If it's not, it's not.
Excellent, Tim. Well spoken. So with that, we did run just a tad long. We wanted to save about 10 minutes for questions. We have about 5 left on the call. Joni, do we have any questions at this time?
We do. Thanks, Chad. So the first question, do we have to have an IT audit done in order to establish what our insurance premium would be?
No. How you establish the insurance premium basically is the size of your business and how many records or transactions that you're doing on an annual basis. Obviously, the more, say, credit card transactions that you're doing, if you're doing a large amount, it would be based on that. Let's say you're not even doing credit card transactions, but you're doing business with people in another way. You're keeping numbers or information health. It could be an accounting firm. You know, how many clients do you have? How many customers do you have? Not necessarily buying directly on a credit card, just customers in general. And from those numbers, then we can determine a price for you. You don't need a scan to do that. Now, I will say, in the application in which you'll fill out to get that, they will ask you questions about what security do you have? Do you have the firewalls? Do you have this in place? Do you do backups? Where are the backups stored? So they're going to be underwriting questions, as they call them, about your business and what you do. But it's nothing you have to have scanned or do a profile necessarily to get an idea of cost.
Perfect. Good answer. Anything else, Joni?
Right. One more. If my information is for sale on the dark web, how can I remove it?
I get that one quite a bit. And the answer is you can't. The dark web is a breeding ground of hackers placing for sale and then people buying and regurgitating. And often we find if you've been out there once, that record will continue to just resurge within that hacking community forever. So there really is no way to get you off the dark web once you've been there. However, with the service that Doghouse provides, we are able to alert you to the fact that your email address and your password were detected on the dark web, where you can take action to either change that email address altogether or be more proactive with your password policy. So we're getting short here, Joni. Do we have a winner determined yet?
So we have a first and a second place winner already.
Okay.
And first place winner is Evan Conrad.
Congratulations,
Whoa. Evan. You're the $100 winner.
Evan, way to be, my man.
And then second place is Will Campbell. Congratulations,
all right,
Will.
Outstanding. So we're going to leave that open till we at least get the 3, and then don't think like it's over and done with. We're trying to give those 3 away.
Just quickly, I want to thank everyone that has put up with me on this. I've tried to not talk too technical about insurance, try to keep it where it's understandable, but this is something that is in the industry probably is the most talked about, the most been thoroughly investigated as far as on our side, what can we do as insurance agents in the insurance industry to keep up with what's happening. And that's what's scary at times is how this is evolving. We now, of course, on our E&O policies and our things that we're doing, now they've updated all these things to include the cloud. That was something a couple of years ago, what are the exposures in the cloud now for customers and for our risk? So it's just an ever-evolving area of insurance, and everyone's trying to keep up with it as best they can.
And it's no different with us, Tim.
I'm sure.
I mean, every day, for those of you that know Taylor, he's the CEO and CTO here at Doghouse IT, and he is literally sitting on webinars all day trying to keep up with this stuff. We have to stay on top of it. This is the promise that we make to our clients, is that we're going to protect them and keep them safe and lower their risk and increase their productivity, and fulfilling that promise of being an end-to-end IT solution for all the clients that we work with. So very much understand that as well, that there's a lot of changes, and you really these days need to be working with an expert to keep up with them. So with that, thank you everybody for joining the call, and this will be recorded and sent out to anybody that wasn't able to make it on the call. But we very much appreciate and value your time, and take care, and everybody have a great rest of your day.